Now that new people have had an opportunity to get caught up a bit in the class and incorporated in our first week's work, I thought it might be appropriate for me to make a summative comment about the various discussion points that were raised as you thought about the environment of the New Testament and Greco-Roman religion in particular. That whole module asks you to think about, and for some of you perhaps for the first time, critically about the topic of religion and the topic of different religious traditions. You were asked to think about the differences, for example, between monotheism, the belief in one God, and polytheism, the belief in many gods. And you were also perhaps brought to an awareness, maybe for the first time, that some religious traditions do not include a belief in God. So technically, if you were talking about Buddhism, Buddhism is one of the great religious traditions that is atheistic. It does not talk about a belief in God. Buddha was not God, nor did he teach a sort of monotheism or polytheism. It's an atheistic religious tradition, just as, say, Confucianism is. So in thinking about monotheism and polytheism and atheism, perhaps this unit brought you to think about, again, maybe for the first time, a critical definition of what we mean by religion. In commenting on several of your discussion posts and your engagement with one another in the discussion, one of the warnings that I made over and over again was to warn you against what we in religious studies call essentialism. And that is an attempt to reduce religion to a set of common elements so that you say, this is what is essential to religion. All religions share this. All religions can be reduced to this. Well, we know all religions can't be reduced to a belief in God, because there are religious traditions that are not about God. And we know that we cannot reduce religion simply to a set of beliefs, because all religions are not about belief. Many, if not most, religions are about what people do. So we have to recognize that the phenomenon of human religiousness, human religiosity, is a complex one that defies any attempt at neat and tidy definition. Indeed, one theorist of religion has given an example of how there can be at least 50 definitions of religion that might work, but none of them particularly satisfactory or working to encompass the whole of human religiosity and its diversity. So some of you may have heard, as a part of our popular culture, that religion are different paths to the same God, and people in religious studies, myself included, would say that's utter nonsense. Let's just abandon that altogether. Religion is, various religions are not just different paths to the same God. That's stupid. That misrepresents human religiosity. Probably if we were going to try to find something even remotely all-encompassing, we might try to say something like this. That is, religion is and has been a principal means by which human beings have sought to situate themselves meaningfully in the cosmos or the universe. Religion is an activity, that means of situating oneself. It is an activity that seems to be concerned with meaning making, to situate oneself meaningfully, and it's not to situate oneself meaningfully simply in a fairly circumscribed and narrow geographical location or community, but really against the backdrop of existence itself, existence in the universe or in the cosmos. That gets at something of the breadth that is required if we are to entertain the topic of human religiosity in all its breadth. But religion is not the only means by which human beings have sought to situate themselves meaningfully within the cosmos. Religion is part and parcel of a variety of activities by which human beings seek to give meaning to their lives. Activities that involve rituals, activities that are often symbolic, activities that are both rational and non-rational, activities that are logical as well as intuitive. So when we looked at Greco-Roman religion and Greco-Roman life, and we discovered that the afterlife was not necessarily central to the way in which people in the Greco-Roman world viewed their life, many of us found that perplexing. And I would just point out that the idea of an afterlife, even within Judaism, developed really very late. And you find debates about the afterlife in the pages of the Jewish scriptures itself. So, for example, in the book of Job, a book that is very well known and very admired for its profundity in the Hebrew Bible, introduces a discussion of the afterlife only to reject it. At the time the book of Job is written, people are still debating about whether or not that makes sense. And there are debates about the afterlife going on in between the lines, even in the pages of the New Testament. So, for example, when you read the chapter on ancient Judaism, you discovered that the Sadducees, who were responsible for the running of the temple, who represented the Jewish aristocracy, rejected the idea of the resurrection of the dead. And the fact that the Pharisees accepted the notion of the resurrection of the dead made their position controversial, and that Jesus sympathized and indeed seemed to have held a notion of the resurrection of the dead made him a controversial figure, as we see in the debates that he has between the religious leaders in the pages of the Gospels. Many of you, in talking about the afterlife, ignored, and I went on to point this out in my individual comments to you, but I thought it important to make a more general comment, that there were a number of ways to think about the afterlife in antiquity, whether you were Greco-Roman pagan or Gentile, or whether you were within the Jewish community. thinking about the afterlife did not always include the idea of resurrection, or particularly resurrection of the body. The afterlife included what we would call symbolic notions of the afterlife, so that one could be thought to live on through one's children, one's progeny, or one could think of the afterlife as living on by the reputation that one established during one's earthly life, or one lived on by the works that one produced, whether they were artifacts like books of poetry or books of history, artifacts like buildings that one left behind, or works of art. All of those were thought of as a kind of immortality as well. Or one could live on by the benefactions that one had given, by making contributions of one's wealth for the benefit of others. So there were different ways of thinking about the afterlife beyond resurrection, and certainly bodily resurrection was hotly debated in the ancient world as well. Paul has to make a case for that, as we're going to see in 1 Corinthians, because some people could think of afterlife in terms of an ongoing spiritual existence of the soul, but bodily resurrection to some seemed utterly ridiculous. Debates about bodily resurrection are hotly contested in New Testament times. But I was particularly interested in the link that some of you made between this idea of an afterlife, including the notion of bodily resurrection, the idea of an afterlife that included some kind of reward, with the possibility of ethics in this life. As if there weren't some notion of an afterlife, then there would be no rationale whatsoever for living ethically or morally in this life, that an afterlife provided some sort of justification for living responsibly in this life. And I pointed out in my comments to several of you, but now I'll do so generally, that the afterlife is not a necessary piece to a discussion of ethics. There were all sorts of important philosophical discussions of ethics, quite apart from a discussion of the afterlife. They began with a discussion of the good. What constitutes the good? And if we can talk about the good, then how can we somehow manifest the good in our lives to achieve what is the good life? Those discussions are pervasive in the ancient world, and they have been pervasive in philosophical discussions ever since. Indeed, Nietzsche's very famous parable of the madman, which talks about the death of God, is at its very basis a discussion about what is the grounding for ethical behavior, and can one talk about a kind of human maturity in engaging in ethical behavior when you remove God from the picture. That is a very old question. It goes all the way back, at least, to Plato and to his dialogue, the Euthyphro, where he debates with one of his pupils whether or not there is something antecedent to the very notion of God, an antecedent which is the good that exists quite apart from God, so that it can be pursued for its own sake, whether or not the gods love it. So in my comments to you in your responses to what you had learned about the Greco-Roman world concerning the afterlife. I wanted to bring to your attention that the discussions of the good life and the discussion of ethics can take place quite apart from a belief in or expectation about the afterlife. But all in all, I thought it was a very rich discussion in which important things were raised about the nature of religion, the possibility of defining religion, the difference between religious traditions, and questions about the good life. All of those came up in that discussion and made it a very rich one that I appreciated, and I hope you did too, and found rewarding as you begin your study of the New Testament.